welcome to the engine room. This time we're having a little panel discussion, and the topic of today is when do you know when it's time to pivot because your marketing strategy isn't working, and do you pivot at all? So the first question is sort of if you could set the scene of when you have had to decide whether to pivot or to stay on course in your marketing strategy.
Yeah, I have to go a little bit back in my memory here.
Because the strategies are just always working.
Yes. It's usually just like I just click start and then it goes. I don't know actually. I think it's a really tough question to begin with, right? Because the way I see it, in the most cases it's a bad idea to pivot at all. If I'm now just thinking out loud, right?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, if shit is not working, then you need to pivot. But is it a matter of strategy? I don't know.
I can give an example.
Yeah.
So when I was working at a previous place, we were running lead generation because that was what was in. So think maybe 2021, 2022, before things really sort of shifted drastically, at least here in Denmark. And we had run this motion for close to a year. We had gotten a lot of leads over the course of that year. And obviously revenue not necessarily catching up, not knowing how fast deals are closing, at some point we could sort of tell, okay, something is definitely off with the marketing spend versus what we see coming in as closed ones. And also just like going through the deal cycles, right? Which was the moment that we then started pivoting towards demand generation, revisiting the ICP, and sort of looking at the fundamentals instead of just saying go, 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 because we had investors' money to, to splurge on, right? It was like, okay, stuff is not working here. So that was like the revenue analytics due to like a red flag from up top. That's sort of my entry point as to when we had to pivot. Could we have continued running that motion doing lead generation? Probably. And they decided to do so at a later stage after I left as well. But ultimately, the revenue analytics were quite clear that things just weren't working. So that was like a pretty easy case of switching.
Here's my view. My answer is 2 words, and it depends. And I think I'm saying it depends because it depends on not necessarily the whole strategy, but like what are the tactics within it. Because there are some tactics where you'll have data within a time frame which tells you how effective that is. Like the example you gave there, you could probably look at like a 6-month look back and go, okay, out of everything that I put in at the top, how much came out of the bottom? Do I like what I see? Like, I think you'd have enough evidence to go, I think we need to pivot from that. But that's probably that's a tactical pivot. So strategically, the layer above it is interesting because there's probably lots of things in there that are working. Like brand, how do you define, I'm changing the questions, but how do you define when brand needs to pivot? That's hard because you haven't got a clear, like, it works or it doesn't. There's loads of signals and stuff. But I think tactically you can pivot depending on some of the data you see, and you can see ROI very quickly on certain things. But strategically, and it's how you define strategy and brand within that. Maybe I think that's a lot harder.
If I can jump in here, I think semantics matter, and I think it's important because if we're talking about a strategic pivot, then you're looking into our ICP is wrong, and that's not what you figured out in the example that you just came with here. You didn't go out and say, well, geographically we're going in the wrong places. We are targeting the wrong companies. The ICP is completely off. The value propositions are off. The messaging is off. We have positioned ourselves wrong, right? That's a strategic pivot you're looking much more at. What you did here is like, I know the case you're talking about a little bit. We talked a lot about it, but you still had the same segments or verticals that you would go after. It's just the execution part that's changed.
True.
And I think the question of do we need to pivot strategy, or do we need to pivot tactics or motions, whatever we want to call it? That's it's two different analysis, and it's there's two different, what do you say, like the gravitas of the two are very different, because you need to be very considerate of switching up a strategy, because as you say, is brand working? It's hard to tell, right? Is our strategy right? Well, do we get customers? But then yes, the strategy is kind of right? Or like the people who buy, I used to say, like, do they pay and stay, right? Then you kind of have an idea of like the marketing strategy or business strategy that you sit down. There's something here that is right. Are we acquiring customers at an efficient rate? Then you might need to look at what the execution looks like, and I think that's the pivot, really.
That's the pivot, yeah. I think for a lot of companies out there who are tasked not necessarily growing 100% year over year in 2025, because obviously things have changed, but I think these sort of very ambitious growth goals do lead to marketeers out there, head of marketings, VPs, maybe digital marketing managers, to be like, oh my goodness, I'm just not hitting the numbers as I need to, and what do I need to do differently to then hit that, right? I don't want to get sacked. And I sort of touched upon it a little bit, which is like the red flags that tell you that a marketing strategy isn't working. And when I say strategy, obviously we have the top level, but I think I'm talking about it from like a fundamental aspect of from A to C, in the sense that things are just not working. You're not hitting your goals. You're the VP. What's going on, right? So for you, Matt, what are the red flags that tell you that things aren't working and things may need to change?
I'd look at loads of different leading indicators, and you sort of touched on it. There is like I'd look at core business metrics and not marketing metrics as a way of deciding that. So is the lead flow as I'd expect it to be? Is retention doing its job? And it's similar to how you look at marketing, but I'm just trying to find things that are causing me problems, like what's hurting me the most, and then is it something I can attribute back to brand or to the strategy that we've already put in place? And then there's one way of looking at it is the numbers, and you go, okay, what's going on there? But what numbers don't tell you why. What will tell you why is the insight, the qualitative side of it. So if it's a retention issue, why are people leaving? What don't they understand? And then you could find out, do you know what, it's a product marketing problem, or it's something around recognition. We actually had a customer come to us just this last week saying we'd nearly lost a customer this month because the directors couldn't remember the name of our business.
Ouch.
They couldn't remember the name of our business. So that tells me, like, they're early stage, and it's not to call anyone out, but that tells me you have a brand problem. You have a big brand problem you need to go with. And there's a difference between a churn number and not knowing why, and then a churn number because of the particular reason. So you can look at those like customer metrics, and then your acquisition metrics are kind of the same thing. Why are people not buying? There's lots of qualitative ways we can try and find that out, like with messaging differentiation, testing, and things like that, and looking at response rates against every type of tactic that we're running. So that I would always start high level and try and get the why behind the numbers, and then I can validate those flags that you're talking about, like what's a red flag and amber, and what's kind of working.
All right. Mm-hmm. Do you have a different view on that?
No, I don't have a different view, but I think it's an interesting thing that you're bringing up, because it made me think that probably marketing strategy, if we're talking strategy, like top level strategy, that change probably shouldn't come from marketing, because we'll only have the front end of it, right? We'll only be able to see acquisition metrics, like acquisition cost, and then you go into stuff like churn rates. So it makes me think, and this is just something that I'm coming up with on the spot, right? And it's not a full-fledged idea, but I'm thinking probably marketing strategy change should come from the customer success team, right? They're the ones who are in charge of, they're seeing all these churns, and like, well, we're acquiring a lot of companies from this industry, but they're all churning as soon as the contract is fulfilled, or like they've been here 6 months, they're all churning. Then it's probably the wrong segment we're going after. I don't know. I think it's an interesting you mentioned churn stuff, right? I think it's one of the things you need to look at if you want to change your marketing strategy.
Before we dive deeper on that, I'm fishing for something here.
Okay.
I'm fishing for net new business. I'm fishing for the quantity of qualified inbounds is simply too low.
But that's not a reason to change your marketing strategy.
Explain.
Because that's probably a reason to change what you're doing or what you're saying, right? It's not the fact that you're not getting a lot of inbounds or like quality inbounds is not the same as who you're going after is wrong. It's not the same thing. You just might be saying the wrong thing. And I think that's probably more likely, right? Because, any business, and I'm being generous here maybe a little bit, but any business is founded on a problem, right? And usually you would see like somebody coming from an industry, they're founding a business because they've seen a problem they can change. So in a lot of cases, founders are their own customers. In a lot of cases, not in every case, but that's at least something to say. And they have a pretty good idea. They probably have, in many cases, raised some funding. They've got some early stage customers, and there's something to say around that, right? So there is some early success metrics or like indicators in terms of that. And then you're adding on a layer of marketing and adding on a layer of sales. And what you're saying is then, well, we're going out marketing to this industry, food and beverage, and we're not really seeing a lot of inbounds come through. But the ones that we do see, they convert at a high rate and they stay. We have a very low churn rate, as an example. Then you shouldn't change your marketing strategy, right? Then you should change your execution, or maybe parts of the strategy, value propositioning and like messaging and that stuff. It's not a signal for you to say food and beverage is not working. It's a signal for you to say, are we serving the right message?
And how do you tell that, Matt?
How do I tell?
How do you tell that it's not strategy, but it's how you actually go about it, the execution part?
I think the interesting thing is it's where you get like slightly pedantic over language and like how people like talk about things, because like I sort of agree with you, because like on the face of it you're like, I wouldn't change my strategy, and there's bits of me like I would change my strategy, but what I actually mean is there's elements of my strategy that I would change almost consistently, because it's always going to change. The audience is going to change. There's stuff that happens away from like our little ego and business, and we're like, oh, this is the best thing, this is the best product in the world. A competitor will appear out of nowhere tomorrow and be like, we're better. We added AI. But we're better than what you guys do. And you're like, oh, we have to change our messaging strategy, or we have to go back to the product team and be like, we need to fix something quick because we're in a real danger. So like there's no one or two signals. There's like you have to be holistically aware of everything going on around you, which makes marketing very difficult sometimes because there's so many variables at play. But it's...
But for the people out there who may be in that spot that Frederick sort of painted, where it might not be a strategy issue, it might be how you go about addressing your market. How do you tell the difference between it being a strategy issue and, let's say, a messaging issue or a sort of simplified go-to-market issue?
So this actually plays in perfectly to something we've been doing, but we would try and scorecard it as best as you can. So you take the different elements of maybe your marketing funnel, and let's say that includes foundational pieces like your messaging and your content. And there's ways of evaluating how good that is. I can do message testing, I can look at engagement rates and feedback and stuff like that. I can mark that out of 10 and just keep an eye on it. And I can do that with nearly any other tactic. I can scorecard everything as much as I can. I'm not going to do it every month because that would be crazy. I haven't got the resource to do it. But I would do it every 6 months, or I would just get an agency to come and do it for me. I'd be like, can you come in and just audit the whole thing? Here's what matters to us as metrics. Go and audit it, and if you're good, we'll hire you, basically. But there's going to be bits in there that have changed, that will no longer work. A message that fell out of favour that you weren't expecting, or a tactic that, like, old demand gen stuff, it just stopped working for a while, and maybe it will forever. But without, I don't know, scorecarding it and auditing it regularly is really hard to... I felt really nicely timed with what we've been talking about, but it felt like that's probably the most effective way of trying to be on top of it as much as you can.
For the listeners out there, what was it you were talking about specifically that references back to this?
I'm assuming you're talking about the updates we'll be doing to the way we audit stuff.
Yeah, it feels like a product plug now.
Yeah.
But,
We're switching that up. And if you want an audit, click the link in the show notes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's just updates to how we audit stuff in SparkForce. That's just it, and it ties very nicely into, well, because it's going to give you a little bit of a context to, well, is it the audience that doesn't really hit, right? So it ties nicely into that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess that's also why a lot of companies do request an audit, which is if you are a small marketing team and you do not have the resources or the capacity, you can reach out, you can get a different set of eyes on it, and then sort of make your own calls and conclusions off of that. And that would almost bring it to sort of like data-driven decision-making in a sense, because obviously you're getting more eyes, you guys are data-driven. But if you were sitting internally, how much does intuition play a role in a potential pivot versus data-driven decision-making?
I think it plays a big role because marketing is not just math, it's also art, right? So I think it plays a big role. And there's some intuition that goes into saying there's something off with this ICP that we're working towards. There's something off with this customer list. There's something that's not hitting, right? So it's also very much gut feel, and gut feel is experience, right? So I think that plays a huge part. If you then can support it with data, then you're golden, right? And that's usually how I try to approach it. If there's something, in terms of value propositions that I'm not really happy with, it starts off as something or messaging, if you will, starts off as something as small as like, I'm not seeing the CTR that I expect to see, right? And then read it, something's off, it's not really hitting, it's not really touching anything in me, even though I'm not the ICP or like the buyer of this, and then it kind of evolves from there, right? So it's those small. I think that's very much intuition, right? It's just seeing those small cues that you see. I've seen this before. There's something off with this, and then investigating and then supporting, backing with data, right?
Yeah,
I'm in complete agreement. Like some of the best marketing people I've ever worked with know something's wrong before the data can tell you.
Yeah,
and that's where you look at marketers who have reached the very top, and a lot of the bigger brand marketers and things like that. Like they've never had data points to work from, and those types of sometimes you wonder how far we've gone with we're trying to use data to validate everything we can. When sometimes those gut instincts and the anecdotal things that someone will hear, where they're like, I heard from sales that this isn't quite people don't quite get what the product is. And if that instinct is burning inside of you, it's normally right. You don't always need a number to back it up. And that's what I mean. Working with strategists I've worked with in the past and heads of marketing, you can just see a light go in there or above their head of a twinkle in the eye maybe, but you're like, oh, you know something. And there's something quite it's kind of the magic of it, not just the data side of it, but there's something quite special about that. But yeah, trust your instincts. 100%.
What would the cues be for someone like you?
If I'm not inspired,
Yeah.
we've all sat there and maybe delivered. I say delivered creative. That makes it sound horrible as agents, but where you've seen creative or something, and you're just a bit like, something's not right. That doesn't quite work, and then you start to see some of the numbers come through, and you're like, I think I know where the problem is.
If I can pitch in, I'm a little bit torn in this, right? Because part of me, if I do something like that, and let's say creatives come through, there's a value proposition, I feel like part of it is, am I inspired by this? Can I kind of feel this? Is there something that, this kind of inspired? Like, does it come out of the image, if you will, right? So that's part of it, and on the other side, I'm also like, well, in many cases, I'm not really ICP, and I'm just a test group of one, right? And so I'm also very heavy on let's just try, because the audience they might like this, right? It might resonate with them. But I think like some of the smaller cues, as what you asked to, is like it is just that, right? I'm not feeling it, right? Do I believe in this message? Can I envision someone actually, seeing the value of my product based on what I'm saying here, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be whatever, like a Nike, just do it, right? It doesn't say anything. It definitely doesn't translate to B2B. However, you like, I can say one of them is like where work gets done, I guess. And none of you guys know what I'm talking about.
Notion.
No, I think it's Monday.
Ah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it is Monday.
Yeah. So like, I don't think that necessarily translates into B2B, and that doesn't really say a lot where work gets done. But there's just that of like, as you're saying, right? Am I inspired by this? Can I envision that because I think that's really our big thing as marketers is being empathetic and understanding, being able to put ourselves in the customer's shoes, right? So can I see myself as a CFO reading this, and then it translates into a business problem that I have? And if I don't believe in that, if even I don't believe in that, the CFO is probably not gonna either.
Yeah. What if we're talking external factors that may force a change? So that could be economic shifts, it could be a competitor, like you mentioned, new regulations. How do you sort of distinguish between a potential pivot and a potential overreaction to temporary problems?
I think if you are expecting or like thinking of changing your strategy, take a week, right? That's one way to avoid overreactions, right? Because there's very little in business that is that urgent that you have to change your whole strategy from yesterday to today, right? So just like cool down, take a week, take a month, and then see if it still feels as urgent, right?
Say it's 4 months of decreasing inbounds.
Yeah. Then I'm figuring out. Then I'm definitely looking at something, right? If it's 4 months of decreasing inbounds, are you asking me where I'm going to start with this? Where I want to start?
Yeah.
We're seeing decrease in inbounds. I'm probably going to go to sales first, and then I want to ask them about the decrease if the quality is also shit. If the quality is still high, then I'm going into my ad platforms and then I'm figuring out if there's some sort of fatigue on the messaging that I'm bringing, right? How long have I been running this messaging for? How long have I run these creative for? Can I see a decrease in any sort of like engagement metric that could be clicks, click-through rates, engagements? If I run video view-throughs, some of that stuff, like can I see a decrease in there as well? Then that might be an indication to me that there's some either creative fatigue or message fatigue. I could see myself also just interview customers, right? Or interview some of the inbounds that are coming in, and then try and figure out if they came in off good value proposition or if they came in because they know the brand. It could be a way to kind of approach it, I think.
What I would do, I would try and find, so we were saying like gut instincts are usually quite good to go on, but gut instincts are informed by a lot of information that our brain has been consuming and we've been feeding into it, and things like the environmental factors, new competitors and stuff like that in the marketplace. That's what's actually informing gut instinct. And when something is scary and I'm like, I don't know the answer to this, like there's obviously the data-driven approach. Let's go through the funnel, see if I can find something blindingly obvious, which is like an easy fix. If there isn't something there, then you've got to walk away and be like, okay, I'm the expert in this industry, this product. What have I not seen that has changed something? So there's really like simple stuff like get out to more industry events and talk to peers who look like you. What's going on? How's the business going? What's working? What isn't working? Get insights from other people and expertise. And you're like, okay, there's ideas here. But then there's also, you have to keep revisiting your competitors. What's changed? What's happening? You might anecdotally hear a salesperson go, "Oh, we're really starting to struggle against X." Go and find out what's going on, what's the product and the solution, and then you're just feeding your gut instinct again. You're putting good insights into your brain, and it doesn't have to be data driven, but it will start to give you. It's also, I really like that example of, do you know what, I'm going to sleep on it. So let's go consume. Let's take a few days away, find out what's happening in our market and our industry and people who look like us, and I'm just going to let that tinker. It might be something. Do you know what, we're all right, and we can keep going, or actually, something has changed that we need to start moving on. I think we so often get stuck in tunnel vision, where you're like, just keep fighting the funnel, keep looking at the dashboard, and it's like, I missed something blindingly obvious in the real world that could have made it better.
Yeah,
I think that's a really strong point in like external factors, right? I can't remember when, 23 at some point, Silicon Valley Bank, there's a run on the bank, right? Everything like that collapses in 48 hours or something like that. The amount of money that was withdrawn from that bank was ridiculous, right? 50% of Silicon Valley tech startups were customers of that bank, right? And they couldn't get their money. That sent shockwaves through, the whole world of SaaS, right? The whole world of tech. And everybody was like, we're not going to purchase anything right now, right? And that happened. That took for that was a couple of months of decreasing inbound across the board, right? So I think that in what you're saying, get some information around what else do you see, and so it might not be, could also be something as obvious as seasonality, right?
Yeah.
I think because usually as marketers we look at what are we doing wrong right now, right? What has broken in our marketing execution that all of a sudden are leading us to this, but in reality it's just a bank collapsing, right?
Yeah, I mean, you two are very, very sure of yourself. It seems,
It's gut instinct.
It's gut instinct. So I'm curious to see if there's been any cases. You didn't want to answer that initial question, Matt. But has there been any time where you or your team, you sort of stuck out with a strategy that on paper seemed to be failing, but it ultimately paid off?
I've got an immediate example because it really didn't work for quite a long time. We had a client, automotive client, who were doing a lot of leasing stuff. We laid out the strategy so that we had some bankers in there. So we were doing a demand gen strategy. We had some bankers in there. I know I can get X amount of leads from a few sources here. And they had a really niche audience. It's like transport managers in organizations and people who manage fleets and things like that. And I'm like, where do these people hang out? They're not on LinkedIn. But we went with a strategy of some paid social. We did buy leads from a supplier in the fleet management magazines and things like that. And a lot of the work there was we set up that engine. We guaranteed a number of leads that they were going to get a month, and the first 2 or 3 months just we actually did a good volume, but the quality was just poor. We just kept running with it, and it's one of those ones that keeps you up at night because you're like, what have I got left? I don't know what tactic else I've got to find this audience. I was like, there must be something else that we can do, and we just sort of sat on it, and the client's getting discontent, and then it became really obvious. Their brand name is I might as well say it. It's Alphabet. You see the problem?
Yeah.
Yeah. And we knew that at the beginning. We knew that was a problem. And we were like, but we were doing loads of lead gen form stuff, and people just, you're getting some leads and stuff, but it's just poor quality. And it's just because people are people know Alphabet as Google. It's a Google, it's a Google company. Yeah. And we were like, we need to actually do stuff that isn't what you've booked us to do. We need to go and create awareness. We just need to do loads of. We actually did this so beautifully well. We did loads of really nice creative, driving cars around, and almost kind of B2C type content. Really going we're the major player in leasing and group management of vehicles, and you have access to the entire BMW, Volkswagen. It's not BMW, Volkswagen, the VW range, and no, actually it is BMW. The range of products, and then all of a sudden people are I'm really familiar with you. I can get the best quality German cars. and we actually improved the quality of the lead flow just by adding on another tactic, which was you actually have no brand awareness for what you are. You've decided to pick Alphabet as your brand, which is crazy. And that improved things dramatically. That's now won awards in the end, the creative that we did for that, just because it's a really big brand you can play with and have some fun. But yeah, that took it took far too long for us to figure that out. Because you're like, why isn't people just buying the product? So yeah, that's the first example that comes to mind.
Okay. What about you, Frederick?
I think my story is kind of a good story of that, right? Went full time in my own business, a month before I had to hand in my bachelor's thesis. Wanted to be the fractional CMO at 25 with no business experience. And this is strategic pivoting, right? Then I wanted to be the full service agency, and then I wanted to be a social and creative shop, and then I wanted to be this and that and that and that, and that's positioning, and that's ICP changes, right? B2B SaaS, demand gen, niche down all the way in there, and then you kind of after 4.5 fucking years, right? It kind of finally did something, right?
Yeah.
I guess that's the biggest kind of thing that I have. I do have a little bit of a leasing client as well, and the first year was very bad, but we kind of stuck to it, and then for the whole second year we hit lead target or above every month of the second year, and nothing really changed.
Yeah.
It was just we've just been out there for a year, and now because there's a lot of seasonality in leasing, and now when you come back and you want to get your sprint car, you're thinking of the right ones.
Yeah, it sort of goes back to that saying, which is marketing can ultimately just shortlist you, and it does require time, right? So patience, but one of the things when you're kept up at night, then patience is perhaps not the first thing that comes to mind, because you're there, first I'd like to sleep, and secondly I'd like to hit my results. And neither is working right now. So having the patience to then, have sort of, in Danish we have the saying, what is it? Cold blood in the veins?
Yeah.
Right?
Cold blood in the veins.
Cold-blooded, man.
Not to be cold-blooded though, but just to, to ease out and to trust your instincts or your intuition. So let's say that you have decided to make changes. Are you going rogue, or are you communicating it internally? And let's assume you guys are VPs or head ofs. You realize something isn't working. My own story is that I went rogue first, right, when I did the revenue analytics. And then later, I was like, I'm going to do a 50-50 split-ish between like running the old stuff, keep the lights on, and then trying the new stuff. And the new stuff was slowly picking up. And that's when I was like, to my CEO, was like, yes, we're going to do this. And, just turns out maybe it wasn't the right way, because stakeholder management, the board, did not necessarily know why, X dropped when Y increased, and then it was all about volume. It was a very harsh lesson to learn, but it was very necessary. So what would you two do? Things aren't working. You need to switch things up. Do you then say outright things are not working, and you have your proposal, or do you slowly just turn on one tab while you turn off the other?
I would have gone rogue. I have no in-house experience, but I would have gone rogue, and I would have done the same thing that you did, I think. And I'd be like, at some point when we're starting to see this scale up, and you see, well, if you want to make money, we do this. If you want volume, we do this. Your pick.
Yeah, I think it's difficult because if you opt in to decrease the volume to increase the quality, then potentially the board will just say, well, now our metrics are off our projections, which means you get a no, right? Which was why I thought, okay, I got to get this other thing running first, while this thing was steadily decreasing. But the decrease is fine. We can live with that because we can explain it. But if this didn't increase, then I have a problem. So I think it's the difficulty where if you were to go up front and say, look, I'm thinking of doing this, but you don't really have any sort of ball running over here, I think that's the sort of the delicate situation. And you're smiling now.
I'm always smiling, just a happy guy. See, I wouldn't go rogue. Well, I'm going to offer the counter opinion. Just because of exactly the same reason you just said there. Because if you run it for a month, and because it does impact other things. Like the lead gen example is perfect. Like, let's remove gated content. It's really quickly obvious something isn't working, and like, not everyone might be aligned to your way of thinking. You have to bring some people with you anyway, like someone who's running the ads, and you're like, I kind of need you to run stuff slightly differently. Just shh. Like, it's very hard to kind of protect that like experiment. The way I would try and approach it is do that test, and I am going to experiment. Here's my hypothesis of why, like, I found a problem. Here's my hypothesis of how we deal with it. And I'm going to keep old way and I'm going to show new way at the same time. I'm asking for permission to experiment with a small proportion of the budget. And what I will do is report back to you in 3 months and tell you like which horse ran the race, won the race. And like, if I lost, hands up, that's me as a marketer trying to get things to work better. If I won, we need to pivot and we need to adjust something in a bit better detail.
So you win either way.
Sort of. If you fail, it's like a tough pill to swallow that your hypothesis has failed. But
I wouldn't say so.
My thinking on this is because I can see where you're coming from, and I just think it's a much harder sell if you say, I think this is wrong, and I think this would be better. It's a hard sell, right? Because somebody said, well, what makes you think this is wrong? Well, so on and so forth. Well, we're getting in your example, we're getting the volumes, right? Then it's not wrong. Like, well, we're not getting the money. Well, we're getting the volume, right? So I can kind of always come back to that. If I, on the other hand, had gone rogue, and be like, it kind of becomes the same, dialogue when you have somebody that's very focused on volume, then it becomes the same. But at least I have some ammunition in my arsenal or whatever to say, well, I actually did do it, and for the last 3 months, here's what we've been seeing. So now I want to shift over more budget, and you didn't even notice it, maybe, right? That's kind of how I would try and go about it. But I'm also just,
Yeah, we're maybe a little more leaning
it's,
that way.
It's your attitude to risk, I guess. Is like how well do you know your people, the management, like.
I guess so.
Yeah, of course.
There's probably other bits, but like, yeah. If you can get away with it.
But I mean, you phrased it, you're a head off or you're a VP, right? Then I'm fucking calling the shots. And then I'm saying, this is how we're going to do it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Even it might be as a hidden secret experiment, but I'm not asking for permission to say I'm going to do something that I'm 100% sure is going to work better.